We're good. Thanks a lot, guys. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk today. The Maru Architecture Design, a proposed BYOD architecture for a shifting threat landscape. You have to say those words very closely, otherwise you say words that you don't mean, and it really tends to upset people. So, who here does BYOD at their offices currently? Raise your hand. All right.
Office is the home office.
That does count. That does count. All right. And who here that doesn't do BYOD is kind of contemplating running that in their offices, or your powers that be are kind of contemplating that? All right. A couple of you. All right. Who that works in security is kind of scared of BYOD? Gives you a little bit of night terrors in the night. To a couple of you there. All right. So, thing I like to say about BYOD is don't panic. BYOD, yeah, it's a scary idea. It's the big, trendy idea that's out on the marketplace nowadays. You're bombarded with it in the literature for the last couple of years. But really, it's not a scary idea. And if you do it the right way, it can actually be add a lot of benefits to your network and to your organization. So my name is Michael Smith. I'm a security consultant with E+. I'm a 10-year veteran of the IT industry. I'm also a doctoral candidate at Capital College. My couple of the alphabet soup of certifications there. Tend to focus on security assessments, BYOD, of my little playgrounds I like to play in. And if you feel like following me, at Dr. Bearsec is my Twitter account. So today we're going to talk about what is BYOD, and that's just more in the context of the talk, because all of you here are smart people and know what BYOD is. We're going to talk about the shifting threat landscape and some of the attitudes on BYOD, whether it's here to stay or whether it's just a trend or a fad, I should say. Some of the benefits and challenges, and then we're going to look at the proposed architectural design, looking at the implementation examples and hypotheticals, and kind of go through some of the aspects that are included in that. So what is BYOD? For the purposes of this talk, BYOD is referring to use-your-own devices, bring your own device. And for the purpose of this talk, it does not include just cell phones. We were talking about cell phones, tablets, and laptops. So basically, any kind of computing device that you can bring in from home that you can buy on the consumer market from Best Buy, that's what we're referring to when we talk about BYOD in your enterprise. So the shifting threat landscape. It's a matter of when, and by that I mean it's a matter of when your company is going to be breached. We all for years like to pretend, oh, there's no way we can be hacked. I think most of you here know, if anyone tells you it's unhackable, they're either crazy or it's just a matter of time until they are hacked. So it's always a matter of when. The moment you accept that in security, it changes your perspective of things and helps actually make your security much better. And we'll get to reasons why a little bit later. So the people attacking you, their business is data theft. That's what they're out there for. It's not, yeah, you're going to get people that are out there doing denial of service attacks that kind of cause chaos, or you're going to get people out there hacking you for revenge or something like that. Most people are out there trying to steal data. They're trying to get credit card information, social security numbers, company secrets, et cetera. That's what we see. I believe the Verizon report had 180 million records stolen from their sample size last year. So they're after data. And as most of you know, business is good. The attackers are getting in, they're getting the information. The weakest link is people. Anyone know what Soylent Green is made from? That's right, same with the weakest link. So by that, we're talking about people being your weakest link in your security chain. We can put all the perimeter security, all the internal security possible out there, spend billions and billions of dollars on security, and it's going to be people, a good portion of the time, they're going to basically defeat that system for us. And usually it's not people doing it maliciously, it's just people doing their everyday job, or people trying to do their everyday job, and basically causing a security breach because of that. And BYOD is the probable future. This is the way that the industry is going. We'll talk a little bit about the differing attitudes, but honestly, my opinion and the opinion of most people is, more than likely than not, in the next 5 years, BYOD is going to be ubiquitous in most organizations. So the first rule of Fight Club is do not talk about, I'm sorry, wrong slide. First rule of the shifting threat landscape, assume you will be breached. Can anyone guess what the second rule of the shifting threat landscape is? Assume you will be breached, that's right. In case I don't hammer this enough on this topic, assume you will be breached. Keep that mindset in there, because all of a sudden your attitude changes from just trying to prevent breaches to preventing them and detecting them. and detecting them becomes absolutely critical, especially when you start expanding into BYOD and especially with the way that attacks are happening nowadays. And when we talk about, and just a little bit, when we talk about a shifting threat landscape, what we're referring to is, back in the day, the attacks were all against the perimeter. You're looking for Microsoft MS-0867. We're looking for 7050. Someone else can shout out some SMB vulns. But we're looking for those kind of things. We're looking for network applications, network OS vulnerabilities, and we're exploiting those with a remote exploit, firing up our Metasploit, going to Millworm and taking a ready-made exploit, sending it out there, getting our shells. Life is good. Well, as security's gone out there and actually improved, and as much as I like to bag on Microsoft, give them credit, they have actually made strides to helping get patches and stuff out there quicker, and patches that don't necessarily destroy your system when you install them, which is a big improvement. As those of you who were in the industry in the late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s kind of know what I'm talking about in that patch and pray mode. So what we're talking about now in the shifting threat landscape is the move to, the most attacks happen either through web attacks, through client-side attacks, or through social engineering. And again, client-side attacks, social engineering, what do those deal with? They deal with the weakest link, and what was the weakest link? That's right, people. So the third rule of a shifting threat landscape, knowledge is power. You want to know about your network. That is absolutely critical. And one thing you'll see with this proposed architecture design is there actually is a logical layer called the intelligence layer. It's that critical in my estimation, a lot of people's estimation, and having that insight into your network. You want to know about your network. In fact, there are some devices put in there solely to get that intelligence, that information about your network. Fourth rule, detection is as important as prevention. Fifth rule, never trust the GUI center. The whole thing for long was build the wall, build the perimeter, build it up. We got these big, hard, strong walls. We got the archers up on the top of the castle shooting down at the intruders. And now with the users and the web attacks, all we do is leave the back door open and, hey, guess what? I'm walking in there and I'm stealing all your gold. So never trust the GUI center. You have to assume that your inside is not safe. You have to assume that your inside, the trust but verify, throw that out the window. You have to assume that your inside is being attacked and your inside is not safe the way that you once might have thought it was back in the day of focusing solely on the perimeter. And the sixth rule of STL is always be reassessing and always be improving. Those of you who work in security, how many of you have had leadership that basically has said, oh, well, we put that in this place, everything is good, everything is fine? Some of you, any of you? Yeah, I see some hands. Obviously, that's the wrong attitude to take. Because if you don't think that people are adapting, if you don't think that attacks are changing, then you're just asking for problems, you're asking for a breach. You're looking to always be ready assessing your network, so always do pen testing, always do that kind of assessment. You're always looking for improving your network by seeing, okay, how can I improve policy? How can I improve what I'm doing here? Or, hey, this new technology came out. Is this something I want to look at implementing in my network, and will this make things different? And will this make things better? That doesn't mean just throw the latest greatest gadget out there, but you need to at least be thinking about what's coming out on the market, and you need to be thinking about new techniques. That's why you go to cons like this, that's why you talk to your peers, and that's why you network, because honestly, some of the best security information I've gotten, some of the best stuff I've learned has come from people at cons like this. So benefits and challenges of BYOD. Challenges of BYOD, loss of control. So one of the biggest things I always hear with BYOD is loss of control. We don't control these assets anymore, and because we don't control those assets, they're not safe. Truth be told, with this complaint, yeah, I get that mentality. I was a system admin before I got into security. I understand the need for total control. I mean, you're a system admin. You are God of your network. You don't want to give up that control. Those of you who are the old school Unix administrators know you are root. Bow before me. That's the kind of loss of control you're giving up in BYOD because you're not controlling the endpoint anymore. The problem, is that mentality is people think that that controlled endpoint is actually safer than a BYOD device or a consumer device. It's really not. If we look at the fact that people are the attack point, that your client-side attacks and your social engineering are what's going after the computer, all of a sudden those controlled laptops really are no more secure than what our consumer-owned laptops are at home. Yeah, maybe a little bit, and there are people that argue with me that disagree with that statement. There might be a little bit of it, but I guarantee you, and those of you who do pen testing for a living know what's the best way to get into a network when you're pen testing if you have an entirely open scope. Yep, there you go, social engineering. Send out an email, open up a shell. Hey, guess what? I'm in your network, and now we're going to have some fun. Those of you that pen test know exactly what I'm talking about because that's the best part of the job right there. Malware exposure. Worry about getting malware because you're not controlling that endpoint anymore. Worry that your users are going home. And let's be honest, on most corporate laptops, at least if your users are smart, they aren't surfing for porn or surfing for illegal downloads or anything like that, things where we know a lot of the bad stuff resides. Of course, most of us also know that in this day and age, when you have weak security on your websites, people hijack that. They'll put their own little drive-by malware in there. You go to that legitimate website, and boom, your computer is hosed anyway. So it doesn't matter if it's, again, corporate asset or your home asset, you're still going to have those issues. You're still going to face those problems there. Data loss and exposure. This is the big one. People are afraid because now that you have this open computer that you may worry about exposing data to the laptop, that you're not controlling that data anymore. I'm sorry, to the internet. You're not controlling that data anymore. People are going to come after it. They're going to find your laptop, and hey, guess what? They're going to have your information. Let me ask you a question. As a corporate policy, how many of your companies require drive-level encryption on your laptops? All right, a few of you. That's good. Most places I ask that question, maybe 10%, if that. The fact is, most people don't do it. If we don't have drive level protection, it doesn't matter, again, corporate asset, home asset, boom, that information's mine. The other problem with data loss and exposure tends to be people using stuff like Dropbox. And a lot of network security where we go into engagements, we find out, hey, you have any policy forbidding Dropbox? Oh yeah, we have that policy. What are you doing to prevent that from happening? Okay, there we go. And finally, the hidden costs. Now this actually is an interesting one. And there'll actually be something contradicting this on the other section when we talk about the benefits. But hidden costs are, we think we're going to save all this money with BYOD, but there might be some costs we don't think about. A good example of this, let's say you decide to let your users use their own cell phones. We're no longer doing company-owned cell phones, but we're subsidizing the cost of their data plans, or we're paying for their data plans fully. Well, in that case, you may not have actually figured out what the correct costs are, and it ends up costing you more than what you originally anticipated in your saving. So that is a concern. However, in my opinion, if you do the proper planning, that should be something that you can mitigate in any kind of BYOD planning. So what are the benefits? Attract top talent. Went to SC Congress in Chicago about 5-6 months ago. Had a BYOD panel. I was really excited to see this panel because Dr. Cindy Wang from Forrester just has done a tremendous amount of research in the field. Had a guy from Spectrum Health up there, the CISO of Spectrum Health, and they were talking about why they're adopting BYOD as a major platform in the industry. And I hear this from my own clients as well. Attracting top talent, the millennials coming up, the guys that are, guys and girls that are 19, 20, 21, 22, people that grew up with technology, more so than, even the guys that are like myself that are in their 30s, we may not have always had the same stuff these had. These are kids that were plugged in from day one. They've had internet, they've had their own computers, they've had laptops, et cetera. And they're used to doing their own work a certain way. The really interesting aspect of it is where some of us might go, okay, we're gonna, not worry about it, we're just gonna do our job. These are kids that'll turn down jobs and go somewhere else because they want to be able to do the job their own way. Because of that, companies that don't have these policies are seeing a loss of certain applicants that they really desire and want. Instead, they're going to competitors. So they see it as a competitive advantage of by not having this and not attracting the top talent that eventually, maybe not in the near-term future, but in the long term, it's going to affect their business to the negative. So in building a business case, it's a big reason to look at it. Increasing productivity. Because you're setting up your equipment the way that you want to set it up, it tends to let you increase your productivity. It tends to let you work the way that you want to work. Those of you that have either local admin access on your laptops or use your own laptops, you know what I'm talking about in that capacity. That's one of the reasons a lot of us, especially when we pen test, love VMs. Because hey, I can control that desktop. I have it set up. I have my backtrack set up exactly as I want. I have another VM that might run 2 or 3 tools. I have set up exactly how I want. And that increases my productivity because I have it all there. I'm not reliant on trying to just figure out what the company build is. Potential cost savings. There are other potential cost savings. I know that contradicts the hidden costs, but the fact that you may not have to buy cell phones anymore, that you may not be paying fully for service costs for self-services, and the fact that if you do laptops, you're not buying laptops, can be a big cost saving in CapEx and ongoing expenses. Interesting enough, in some of these surveys that we've seen, while some companies say, "Oh, I can't do BYOD because I have to subsidize my employee purchases," a lot of employees are like, "I don't care. I want to use my own phone. I don't want to carry around 2 phones. I'll pay for my own device and not have a problem. I'll pay for my own service plan and not have a problem. I'll pay for my own laptop and not have a problem." Now, my personal thing for all you out there that are high-level management and stuff is subsidize your employee purchases. It's nice, it's good, treat them right, and help gain that loyalty. But it's also a selfish plea for for my people and my peers. And then the Green IT Initiative, minor one, but less computers being bought, less computers being thrown in landfills. You can advertise it, you can say we're practicing a green initiative. You can just feel good about yourself. So some adoption views. BYOD in the enterprise. These are companies currently that have BYOD in their enterprises. Some big names on there: EA, Dell, Spectrum Health, Intel, Cisco, VMware, E+, shameless plug. 59% of companies feel that they are at a competitive disadvantage without BYOD. So if they don't have BYOD, even the ones that don't necessarily have it implemented feel that they are at a competitive disadvantage without it. And in 5 years, BYOD would be ubiquitous. Yes, I stole that quote from, again, Dr. Wang from Forrester. So a couple of other things, and I should have saved this because this is out of order now. BYOD isn't unavoidable. So these are some opposing views. This is the CIO of NOAA, feels that, whereas you hear all the trends and you hear all the newspaper articles of, hey, guess what, BYOD is coming, it's a tidal wave, you can't avoid it. Well, this guy feels, hey, maybe it's not the right approach in every situation. Which devices are best suited to allow employees to do their job? Ask that question. Paul Green from the Sheffield City Council. And honestly, I think Paul brings up a great point with that is, do we need to throw out BYOD willy-nilly? Now, my personal feeling is, yes, it will benefit, and if you do it, again, if you secure it the right way, it shouldn't make a difference whether you're using corporate assets or you're using consumer assets. The goal is all about securing the data rather than worry about the endpoint. But the question is, if you are considering a BYOD program, ask, what devices do the employees need to do their job? Do they need to have an iPad to do their job? Do they need to have a MacBook Pro to do their job? My answer is always yes, but hey, I'm selfish like that for my own reasons. And BYOD, this is my favorite one. BYOD will decline as enterprise mobility grows by Nucleus Research. This runs counter to pretty much what every other marketing and IT expert on the planet has said. Their feeling at the time, and this was actually right before the Windows 8 launch, was that Windows 8 coming out would change the entire face and BYOD would die because Windows 8 would be so awesome. How many people use Windows 8? All right, not a lot of you. Wow, okay. Those of you who have at least seen it, how many like Windows 8? Okay, yeah, that's pretty much my feeling on the matter too. I wonder if I'm kind of curious if these guys will change their mind on this. So, when we talk about mobile device management, BYOD architectures, we really talk about 3 different types of architectures. We have a device-centric architecture, which is all about securing the device. That's the classic of what you're probably going to see in most organizations right now. You might have a mix of corporate-owned and user-owned assets. You might have completely user-owned assets. Generally, it's agent-based deployment, so you have some kind of MDM solution that's out there that's securing your device, giving control over that device. It's a heavier touch because you have to touch all those endpoints. You have to deal with that aspect. You're controlling your device. You're minimizing your data risk by having that safer endpoint. Again, we talked about that, my feelings on that, but again, the goal of that architecture is to secure the endpoint. And uses a native mobile interface, which honestly is the biggest selling point of this type of architecture is because of the fact, hey, I pull out my iPhone, it looks just like my iPhone. Whereas certain other things, when they're controlled, it may not necessarily look like your iPhone. It may not look like your Android device. There might be different ways that they do it, or they might force you to use certain applications. So there is an advantage to that. Then we have the data-centric model, which is, again, more focused on the data. Data usually resides on some kind of centralized server and has a light touch. what the data-centric model generally tends to do is utilize a virtual desktop type interface. So everything's virtualized, everything's virtual desktop. And while that may not matter in the most part on your laptop, those of us that have used virtual desktoping on cell phones and tablets know it is a painful experience. I'll do it when I have to in an absolute emergency, and I'll be the first to say it's an absolute saved my butt many times by having RDP access on a phone or on a tablet, but it's still not fun to do. And it takes me, I would say, at least twice as long to do what I could do with a keyboard and a mouse. So the goal of these is kind of work towards the application-centric model. And the application-centric model is basically the, kind of the best of all worlds in the situation. We're controlling access to the data, but we're doing it by having secure apps. So those of you that use like Citrix in the past, streaming apps from that, similar concept. We have a single app, you're clicking on it, and I'm using this app that's still secured from the server. App wrapping is another security mechanism that kind of follows the same type of logical architecture. It has a light touch. You shouldn't have to touch it, or if you do, you're downloading a little client that's going to let you run the, for example, I hate to go back to Citrix, but using Citrix as as an example, be able to run Citrix on there. Usually requires a mobile app development by the platform because a lot of times you're creating your own apps. You're creating your own apps for in-house with the company. It's still a very young technology. This is where the market's moving to. It's not quite there yet. So in order to kind of fill that gap, we proposed the Maru Architecture Design, which is what I'm going to present to you here today. That architecture design, let me stress, this is one way to do it. This is not the way to do it. I'm not arrogant enough to go out and say, hey, this is how you should do it. If you don't do it, you're wrong. Not going to say that. This is one way to do it. It's not going to be, and honestly, it's not going to be the best solution for every vertical that's out there, every industry that's out there. However, what the goal of this is to give you ideas. Think about this from an academic research standpoint, this from a market research standpoint, and then think about your own ideas and really kind of build your own architecture when implementing these type of solutions. So what the Maru architecture looks at is it kind of combines elements of defense in depth and zero trust. We still look at our internal network, and we still kind of want to have those layers of defensive depth, but we also want to think from the standpoint of we can't trust anything in our network. What was Agent Mulder's password on the X-Files? Trust no one. Don't trust but verify. That's dead talk. Again, the moment that I can come in using social engineering, I can use client-side attacks, I can't trust my corporate assets anymore. Therefore, I have to treat them exactly the same way I treat a non-corporate asset, which is untrusted. That's my viewpoint. Again, others will disagree. My personal standpoint is be paranoid in this situation, don't trust anything, and act accordingly. So what makes a good secure BYOD architecture? It's not just about throwing strong technical controls out there. I know a lot of you are bombarded with the literature from vendors that say, hey, install our product, you have secure BYOD. That is not the case, all right? You can't just install a product and expect to have a secure system. And those who use secure networks know what I'm talking about. It's a combination of culture, it's a combination of technical controls, and it's a combination of written policies. You need to have those policies in place. You need to have define what the expectations of the organization are, what the expectations of the users are, and then you use those technical controls to enforce those expectations. And that helps give us a secure BYOD architecture. But again, it is about creating a proper culture in this sense, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Take a user-centric approach. Focus on the user. It's not about you. It's not about us as admins. It's about the user. The goal of BYOD is not to save money to the company. The goal of BYOD really is about productivity. And what that productivity is basically saying, okay, you as the user are smart enough to know what is the best way for you to take my data and do your job and be able to make a product that's going to be great for the marketplace or help enhance my company, help enhance my bottom line, or even better, you're going to do it in a more efficient manner and you're going to save me money, thus making me more money. That's the goal of this. To break it down in simple terms, that's the goal of BYOD. That should be the goal, I should say, of BYOD, is making it easier for the user to do their job without opening up your network to every kind of miscreant and every kind of malady on the planet. So we're looking at minimal trust. It's based on zero trust or on no trust or zero trust design principles. Two people that put out, or two groups that put out these kind of design principles. Forrester has a bunch of articles on it. They kind of coined the term zero trust. And then ISOCOM offers a defense called the Mobius defense. Excellent article. That's open source. Highly recommended read. Those of you not familiar with ISOCOM, OSSTMM or TTM, I always butcher that in the thing, but yeah, open source security testing methodology. Yeah. All right. Anyway, yeah, you look it up, you'll find it. I always butcher it, but ISOCOM, good stuff on that particular, on the Mobius defense. So it's going to combine aspects of the three main architecture types. We're going to combine aspects of device-centric, data-centric, and application-centric models. It's about the users and about the data. We're going to control the data within the enterprise. We're not worrying about controlling the data on the endpoint. But we want to limit the amount of data that reaches the device and reaches the endpoint. We don't want to control their experience, but we do want to control how they access our data. And it's also about in-depth insight about your network. Control the delivery. Again, we want to give them the delivery. We want to deliver that to this to their device, and then let them use the data in a secure fashion. We want to inspect traffic at the data access points. That's what we're worried about. Not worried about the endpoints as much. We're worried about those data access points. How are they getting to the data? How are we protecting that? And then enterprise intelligence gathering. Who's familiar with the concept of security analytics and security intelligence? All right, a few of you. Next 5 years is going to be one of your what you're seeing with BYOD flooded now, that's what you're going to be seeing in the next over the next 5 years is you're going to be flooded with security analytics and intelligence. It's all about being able to use all that traffic, all that information that we gather on a day-to-day basis, and being able to data mine it and be able to draw and build knowledge based on that information and to help make ourselves more secure. And for those of you who didn't guess, that's actually what my dissertation is on, so you can see where I have a little bit of a biased opinion on that, but honestly, based on the research, that is where it's going. This is kind of an example a colleague of mine drew up on this kind of architecture design from a logical perspective. It looks a little bit of a mishmash, I know, but just kind of gives you an idea of some of the aspects that would be involved in there. So these are our minimal trust security layers. Again, I've talked about the layer design. These are the logical layers that we have. Data architecture layer, the virtualization layer, defensive security infrastructure layer, our application layer, the device user layer. Still want to worry about them, just it's not our central focus. And then supporting it all at the very base of the pyramid is our intelligence layer. So what's the data architecture layer? This is our standard kind of database layer. This is where we're keeping our data. So this is our SAN, our NAS, our JBODs, file servers, etc. This is basically our logical layer where we have all our data is centralized, our databases, and where we're accessing that data. And we want to focus on securing that layer. What are some of the ways that we're going to secure that? Well, we're going to look at encryption, obviously, as being a big way to do it. Looking at file-level encryption, looking at, you look at hardware encryption as well. Nowadays, there are SANs that sell basically hard disks that have physical encryption on there. They are awesome products. They're not fail-safe products, and hence why I actually tend to prefer more of a file-level encryption solution. And people wanting specific vendors, I'll tell you after the fact. But basically, some of the policies that we're going to focus on when we're worried about securing this layer is we want to look at our forensics policy. So how are we going to perform forensics on this type of information if we're only focused on the data? As well as we're looking at encryption and data storage policies. So what needs to be encrypted? How are we storing our data? How are we backing up our data? Those are the kind of things that we want to keep in mind with this particular architecture setup. Our virtualization layer. This is a huge aspect of this architecture design. It's all about virtualization. The reason it's all about virtualization because it gives us a way to control the delivery of the data to the endpoint device. So we basically have two kinds of options for when we talk about the delivery aspect. But we have a virtual server infrastructure, which is our hypervisors, our server VMs. A lot of us nowadays are using like ESX, or we're using Zen Server, or one of those kind of products. And we're familiar, we have our servers all virtualized. What a lot of us aren't using now, but it's starting to grow, is the virtual end user infrastructure. So we're talking virtual desktoping, where we get that desktop, we're throwing out that Microsoft desktop. And that's one way to do it. It honestly is a great solution, especially when you have a laptop aspect for it. The better thing is the virtual applications. And again, this is kind of a growing field now. There are two really good vendors in my mind out right now that are doing it. VMware has Horizon, which is an awesome product, and the Citrix Cloud Gateway, another one that's just an awesome product that kind of really delivers this type of experience. Really delivers it almost on an application level to where I can actually virtualize that application. I can launch it from my mobile device or launch it from my desktop and be able to utilize that without actually having to worry about, okay, I'm using a Mac, but I'm not being forced into that Windows desktop that I may dislike passionately with every ounce of my being. Or I'm a Linux user and I don't want to use, I have to retreat from the command line for a minute and actually go into the GUI, but yes, still I can still utilize it. Is it foolproof? No. However, as time goes by, and some of the stuff that we're seeing also is going to be the ability to actually virtualize mobile apps. So to actually give you that native mobile experience that you'd have using a iPhone or an iPad, but actually do it from do it where it's streamed from a virtualized server, so that that data that's accessed by that is actually protected there. Why is that important? Well, at that point, that data never actually physically touches my device. It's all in that streaming application. What's the negative of this? Well, of course, I have to have always-on internet. But we're kind of getting that way as a society. So again, not a foolproof design, but something, given the way that we do, will help meet the needs of a lot of people. Virtual appliances. So virtual UTM, virtual switching, virtual routing, virtual WAFs. Why am I a big fan of this? Well, this kind of brings in some of the zero trust principles into effect. One of the goals of zero trust is basically scanning every bit of traffic that goes through your network. You're running it through some kind of application or some kind of firewall access, so that you are scanning, monitoring that traffic, any bit that goes, whether it's going from the server to the endpoint, whether it's going from endpoint to endpoint, doesn't matter, every bit of that traffic is being monitored. By adapting some of the virtual appliances, and one of the reasons that we go to virtual is, it actually gives us that ability to be able to handle that a little bit better, whereas in a physical world, we don't really have that technology, other than going with like a provider level firewall for a medium business network and enterprise. And those of you that worked in those enterprises know if you go out there and suggest a $500,000 to $750,000 firewall to your bosses, they will either laugh at you or fire you for those suggestions. So this is kind of a way around it. Some of the policies that we look into place for this layer are acceptable use policy. I want to spell out what's acceptable to our users. What can they do? What can't they do with our system? Why do we want this? Well, again, we want to set those expectations to the users. And the big thing I want to add with policies are, if you put policies into place, you have to enforce them. You can't just put a policy out there and say, oh, you didn't pass it, shame on you, we're done. There needs to be real world real world consequences for failure to comply. I'm not saying you fire a person right away, but honestly, if they come out and they're not doing what they're supposed to do and they get caught a couple times, again, they need to be, there needs to be consequences for those actions. And there needs to be teeth to it. Without having that, this whole plan, and really a lot of security plans, fall apart. And those of you who've been in enterprises where you have experienced security failures know that's a good reason why those failures happen, is you don't have that either buy-in from HR, buy-in from management, and those policies have no teeth. So there's no reason that the users really truly need to follow them. Defensive security infrastructure layer. This is our traditional defensive security. I'm not going to go too much into this, but we're looking at stuff like IPSs and IDSs, web filtering, looking at multi-factor authentication. I'm a big fan of multi-factor authentication. I'm personally in favor of using it within the network more and more, and I wish more places would. Yes, I know pulling out a token and using like an RSA token is a pain in the butt. For remote access, I think it's an absolute must. In the enterprise, yeah, I can see where some people might complain about it. If you have one of those things, start using certificates. Again, not a foolproof application, but using certificates along with some kind of password. Again, something I have, something I know. Sure, are there ways around that? Absolutely. However, is it going to help prevent a lot of things from happening? Absolutely. And the goal is you're never going to be able to prevent 100%. Again, assume you will be breached. You're never going to be 100% safe. But the goal is to try to mitigate as much of the easy stuff as possible, make it as difficult as possible for people to get onto your network and to do things on your network, and basically try to remove as many of those risks as possible within the cost confines to go to the whole risk assessment point. Some of the administrative policies that we look at acceptable use, we look at privacy policy. Here's a question. Are you allowed to search your users' emails? Yes and no. Court precedent has said if you have not put an explicit expectation of, if there is no explicit expectation not to have privacy, there actually exists an implicit expectation of privacy within user emails. There have been court cases where employees have been fired, they've gone and sued, and they've won those cases because they were fired because they were looking in those emails and there was no policy out there saying, hey, your network will be scanned. It's a simple one-word line. This is our network, or a certain simple paragraph. This is our network. We have the right to search any traffic. We have the right to search any email. We have the right to search anything on these wires. You should be covered. Now, that being said, I'm not a lawyer. Talk to your lawyer first. And that goes with any policy. Never implement a policy without having it reviewed by legal first. It's just good common sense, but you want to make sure you protect yourself. And that way then it doesn't come back on you and they say, hey, you said this would work. Pack your stuff, you're fired. You want to avoid that, obviously. Support policy. This is a big one. Who's supporting your equipment out there? Now that you're running BYOD, who actually is going to support that laptop? Is it going to be my help desk? Are we going to force them to support every single laptop out there? Are we going to limit the choices that they have? Or else are we going to say, hey, you as the users, if it's an application that the company requires, we'll support it. Otherwise, you guys need to take that to Best Buy, to the Apple Store, to wherever you bought your laptop and have them fix the physical hardware and problems that you might have. And honestly, there's no right or wrong answer to that particular question. My personal feeling is put the onus on the end user. To be honest with you, most of them want to bring it in, and nowadays, a lot more users are more tech savvy than we give them credit for, enough to the point where they can actually do some level 1 help desk, level 1 tech support on their hardware and actually be able to support their stuff for them. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. So in my company, we do kind of a mix. The engineers are allowed to have the BYOD. I actually have a corporate-owned asset because I just don't have the cash right now to buy a nice shiny new MacBook Pro. If anyone from my company is watching, hint, hint. So in that case, and from our standpoint, we do most of our tech support ourselves. Yeah. Oh, you can do whatever you want. Now, from a fairness standpoint, you might get complaints in that aspects. My personal feeling is this, and this is especially true if you subsidize your employee's purchase of like a laptop per se. And this is what a lot of companies that do that require. In fact, my company, I should say that my company, part of this things that have been under discussion is actually to adopt that kind of program. And part of the stipulation will be is if we give you this money, you need to buy an extended warranty and you need to take it to that person and have them do the physical support on that. Now, that being said, if it's an application that I'm required to use, then they're going to provide support on that. What they're not going to start doing, though, is, hey, my hard drive failed. I have to send in my laptop to go get it fixed. No, that's going to go and you deal with Dell tech support. You call them in. They send you the new hard drive. You replace it out. Those who've been on the phone with Dell tech support to get something fixed like that know what a pain it is, and being on a help desk or a desktop support type role and having to deal with that, never a fun aspect. So, yes, sir. Hmm?
I would always be not clear something. When you take input from like that they only have
Agreed.
So is their anecdotal evidence always like no one calls help and says, no, I'm totally fine. Bitch, badass. Thanks for no one ever does it. So
I actually do another talk on BYOD, and it focuses on the planning aspects of BYOD. And one of the big things that we stress when doing it is that when implementing a BYOD program, planning is hands down the most important aspect of it. It's getting all this information up front, and that's one of the things that we recommend, and we even do this in engagement with our clients, is we get people in a room and we get stakeholders from some of the various user areas and get an idea of what they're looking at and what the kind of technical levels that they may have are in that capacity. And you're right. We will hear from the tech desk, oh my God, we have the stupidest users. They're dumb. And we've all said that. And I mean, every one of us that works in IT has said our users are idiots. I mean, we say it on a daily basis. It's just what IT people do. And you're right. It's not really the truth. We just are so jaded and dealt with and frustrated. Mhm. That is true too.
You as a person who grows up rarely interact with it. So it's you know, it's a weird like social type thing. And
I agree.
It's really important to listen from help desk, but don't remember that help desk will never be like a box.
And that's honestly why we recommend when playing this out is you actually have a, you don't just let IT play in a BYOD program. Disaster, recipe for disaster. You need to include legal in there, you need to include HR in there, you need to include stakeholders from across your organization, and you sure need to include management in there. You need management buy-in, because if you don't have senior management buy-in to BYOD, that program will fail faster than you can imagine. If it gets to a point where you actually start implementing stuff, and then all of a sudden they start pulling their approval of it, it's really going to cause problems. And I've seen it happen, and it is just, it's a mess. I mean, it's just train wreck mess of just bad proportions. Mm-hmm. I think well, that's a good question, actually. I have to say you need, I would say personally you might need a little bit of extra training. I really would love to say that most entry level, even the entry level guys can at least tell the difference between a lot of device, there's a problem with the device versus a problem with the application. When you start getting up into an operating system level, that's where you're probably going to run into a little bit more problem. It's a Windows problem versus a Adobe problem. How many of you have been on the help desk with, or have been on a support call with like Adobe and gotten, oh, it's a Windows problem? Okay, I just called Microsoft. They said it was an Adobe problem. One of you guys is lying to me. Tell me which one of these are. Oh yeah, you're always going to see that. And that actually is something that we will get to. All right, so back to the policies. We'll do. Yes, sir. That's a good point too. Although I will say this, if you're doing it where your data does not touch those devices, it should never make a difference. Shouldn't, yes, and there's your key thing. So if you are doing it properly, it shouldn't be an issue, but that's what we want to make sure we look at. And then change policies. How do we go about performing changes on our network? Change management. If you don't have a change management policy in your network, I never want to be arrogant enough to say you're doing it wrong, but well, that's pretty close. All right, other devices, your gateway border devices, segmentation devices. Just because you have VLANs does not mean you are secure, all right? Segmentation firewalls, access lists. You have a layer 3 switch, do something, but limit that traffic that can go from one segment to the other. I can't tell you how many networks I walk in there, I'll start looking at this stuff and going, why is this not blocked? Why can I still why is this completely open? You have the ability to do it. It's free to do it. I mean, it's not even like you're paying extra money. Most of the people are using some kind of layer 3 switch. It's free. It's usually, I mean, I can't think of a layer 3 switch I've been on that does not have some kind of access list capabilities to the point where you can't configure that real quick to at least block out and limit what traffic can go from here to there. You know, there's no reason why my general users should ever be going on the same VLAN as my accounting people if I segment it that way by department, which is the way I prefer to. Just for segmentation, I always prefer to segment by department. That way, all my accounting traffic on the same VLAN, and I don't want anyone else going on that VLAN for obvious reasons, HR, blah, blah, blah. That's how I prefer to do it. That's not saying that's the only way to do it, but that's just my preferred way. So when I look at that standpoint, it's pretty much, yeah, I want those packet filters saying anything from these other VLANs, nope, you can't get there. The only place this place can go is to my servers and to my internet pipe. So you want to have that kind of segmentation aspects in there. If you can afford it, I put in segmentation firewalls and really get that really good, get that stateful packet inspection going, or if you really want to spend the money, get the application layer, but then you're going to get all that nice heavy latency in your network, and it may not be as fun or usable for you as you get your users complaining about speed. Our network devices, access lists, access switches, wireless, and then our anti-malware devices. And by anti-malware devices, I'm referring to both your anti-malware gateways, so things that sit at the gateway, signature-based, looking at your traffic as it's coming in and blocking it if it finds it. I'm also looking at your internal malware devices. Example of those, for those of you not familiar with what I'm referring to, FireEye, FireAmp, those type of capacities, which, yeah, they do monitor internal traffic, but I like to consider those almost an inside-out kind of way. Those of you who use those kind of devices or haven't used them, check them out sometime. Awesome, awesome stuff. Really do some neat, really doing some neat stuff along this technology. So highly recommend those type of devices. So look at the application layer. Application layer, this is talking about our applications. So what we're looking at is a couple of different types of applications. We have our application servers, so our front-end servers and our back-end servers. Back-end stuff like SQL, front-end, might be a web server, might be some kind of client-based server, something of that capacity. Network-centric application, that's our traditional client-server model that we're all familiar with. Clients on the desktop call back to the server. Web-centric application, these are either internal-based web apps or cloud-based. Now we're starting to look into cloud. Everyone's going to the cloud. Is cloud secure? No, some people say no. Some people, I can, as I see Dave back there shaking his head, I can tell you now, I know people that will disagree with you passionately. My personal feeling is there's some good and some bad to it. I'm not fully prepared to say it's the way to go right now. That being said, it's another one of those trends that seems to be where a lot of people are shifting. So as much as we as security people want to kick and scream and think we can change the tide of flow, we really can't do it because it's all eventually comes down to the fact it's cost driven. We all know we want to say this is the perfect security. We know what they're going to implement is based on risk versus cost. I mean, that's it's a business, IT and security especially is turned into business decisions. And you need to understand that, especially when making recommendations, is you have to understand the business impact on it and be able to build that business case, because 9 times out of 10, that's how you're going to sell management on these solutions, is building that correct business case and showing them, look, by implementing this, it's going to give you this. Perfect example. I did a assessment for a medical practice. This was Swiss cheese. I literally had domain admin access within less than an hour. I mean, it's that Swiss cheese. And what the problem ended up being was that doctors that ran the practice had no desire to make any changes. They didn't want to do it. Well, those of you who are familiar with HIPAA may be familiar with the concept of meaningful use. And what meaningful use is basically it is the government's way of kind of cajoling doctors into doing HIPAA compliance by meeting certain standards and then giving them money for meeting certain standards. We call that a bribe or meaningful use. So essentially the way that we sold the security changes to the doctors was, look, you do this, you get this money. Guess who all of a sudden was on board with security changes? And sometimes that's how you have to do it. So you have to, as a security professional especially, and this is kind of an aside, learn to make those cases because it will make your life a lot easier. So looking at mobile applications too, first-party applications, stuff that you would develop in-house, third-party applications. These are the applications that we are, might buy out of the iTunes store. A lot of the mobile device management solutions that are currently out there will actually let you start setting up your own app store, and you can bulk buy the devices, or you can bulk buy the applications then for your users to utilize instead of buying them directly from the app store. If that's the right approach or not, again, that's up to your own policy. Beyond the scope of today, but definitely a approach. And then looking at application level security, This is looking at dynamic behavior detection, so looking at how the app acts on based on a baseline, and then flagging security issues if that deviates from that baseline. Also looking at application wrapping, which is basically taking that mobile application or that desktop application, putting it into a wrapper, and then having kind of a secured delivery mechanism by putting it in an application wrapping. Administrative controls, again, we go back to our privacy policy, our acceptable use policy, and then forensics and our MDM policy. That's putting a mobile device management, basically something that says, hey, much like a BlackBerry, I can control your iPhone a little bit or do other things. Now, whereas it may sound like I'm not in favor of MDM devices, I actually am very much in favor of them, and I'll get to why in a few minutes. Our user layer. Basically, users, this is our users, this is the people using it, these are their devices. As you see here, my firm belief, user devices are the same as company devices. Don't trust any of them. They all can be owned, they all can be broken into, so don't trust any of them. With user devices, though, even with a BYOD, we still want to actually encourage proper security. Even though we're not focusing on the endpoint from a cultural standpoint, we want to make sure that our users understand, even on their own devices, there isn't such a concept of good security. So let's actually push some endpoint security to them. Anti-malware, HIPS, firewall, encryption. You know, again, first thing I'll tell any of my family members that come to me, hey, I got a new laptop, what should I do? Encrypt it. Why? Well, that way if you lose it, it's going to be a lot harder for someone to be able to get to your data on there. So encrypt that puppy. First thing you do, second thing you do, start install some kind of anti-malware suite on there. You know, are they foolproof? Absolutely not. Again, anyone that's a pen tester knows you can get around an antivirus. It's not hard, not difficult. That being said, it's still going to get a lot of your low-hanging fruit, and that's the goal. Never expect any one security solution to be 100% effective. The goal is to implement solutions that are going to start catching certain things, and that's why, again, the focus of defense in depth, defensive layers. If that one thing doesn't get it, then hopefully another thing will get it, and then another thing and another thing. So building those layers around it, and that's why I still am a big fan of the concept, even with the zero trust, even with zero trust and not trusting everything, is we still want to help use that practice because it will help secure our devices overall by giving us multiple opportunities to catch some of the things that get onto our networks and onto our devices. Some of the policies around it, administrative controls are software and encryption policies. This is requiring encryption. Again, to me, this should be a no-brainer at every company. Sadly, it's not, but my opinion, require encryption. You know, stuff like TrueCrypt is free. So, I mean, it's not even like you have to pay money. You have a free device. And honestly, commercial versions, commercial encryption suites that give you centralized control, really not all that expensive. I think, you know, I want to say like Sophos is something like $30 a user or $50 a user, and that includes all the anti-malware and everything like that. Works on Mac, works on Windows, etc. And even Windows and Mac, they have some form of encryption built into the operating systems that you can utilize. So there's a ton of different ways that you can do it. Again, can't preach it enough. Subsidy policy, are we subsidizing the purchase or are we not subsidizing the purchase? Forensics policy, this is actually a big one on the devices. I no longer own this devices. Can I do forensics on it? And I can't tell you the answer because it's going to depend on first of all, it's going to depend on what your legal people, and this is why you get legal involved. It's going to depend on what your legal people feel is the risk if you do force forensics on user-owned devices. It's also going to be looking at your state and your country's law. To my knowledge, in the US, there is no law against doing forensics on user-owned devices. I've never heard of one, at least. I'm not saying that it couldn't be out there, but I don't know of one. Individual states, I don't know all 50 states, so there definitely could be certain states that allow it or that don't actually made it illegal, that don't allow it. So that's why you want to make sure legal's involved to make sure that wherever you are working in, you are following their rules. And especially gets thorny when you go international, since the privacy laws in places like Europe are a lot more stringent than they are here. Privacy policy, support policy. So we talked about support policy, we talked about that a little bit earlier. The intelligence layer, this is my favorite layer. So it's all about intelligence. Knowledge is power. Yes, yeah. Knowledge is power. So when we talk about the intelligence layer, we're looking at items that will give us intelligence on the network. So we talk about a SIM. I know some people bag on SIMs. They don't think they're worthwhile. I disagree wholeheartedly. I like having that centralized repository and not talking about just log aggregation. I like the correlation engine. I like having, again, we're talking security analytics. There you go. That is the basic security analytic, is having the ability to take all those logs and data mine that information, looking for correlation between events and being able to give you alerts. Does that mean I install a SIEM and my network's completely secure? Absolutely not. But again, if we look at it not just about prevention, but about prevention and detection, all of a sudden, I'm putting a device in there that helps me detect these problems. Data classification. Big fan of data classification. What data classification means is either through both manual and automated processes, I'm looking at data and looking at certain keywords and then classifying that, much like the military would do, as secret, public, confidential. Based on that information, I'm going to tie that into our next thing, which is the DLP system. And I know we've all had bad issues with DLP in the past, but using data classification with DLP, we can actually set it up so that it's looking for those data classification flags as well as certain keywords and help prevent some of that from going out of our network. Again, not 100% foolproof, and I'll never make that claim. That being said, though, it's going to help prevent a lot of stuff, and that's our goal, is to try to prevent as much as possible. DRM. This is actually something that a coworker of mine put into a place he used to work at. And basically, if DLP flagged something that was considered confidential or a certain security level, it would send it to a digital rights management solution. They would apply DRM to the document and then let it go out the network. So all of a sudden, they add DRM controls to it, and they have a new control aspect over that data. That was a great idea. Access control. How are we accessing the data? I'm talking in this case kind of network access control, giving us posture assessment. Yes, can you beat it? Sure, certain ones you can, especially if it's a DHCP based. I can get around it without a problem. That being said, one of the reasons I like access control is a lot of times if you get a good system, it will do posture checks on your system. What I say with intelligence gives me more information about my network. And that's why I like mobile device management. Because I'm putting a client on all my devices, all of a sudden I can do posture check. I can see if this device has been jailbroken, rooted, or whatever, and get an idea of what's on my network and what's not, and use that for my own purposes. And this is just some possible starting points. First year to 18 months. If anyone would like a copy of the deck, just come up and see me afterwards. I'll be happy to send it to you guys. And so future research directions, we're basically looking at overcoming some of the specific industry difficulties. Yes, Jedi lightsaber fighting squirrels is one of my favorite pictures. Overcoming specific industry difficulties. Perfect example. We talked about kind of having to have, in this situation where we have a constant wireless, constant connected endpoint. Well, in certain situations, medical, for example, there's certain areas you can't have wireless going because it will, kill people. So that's something we have to figure out. How do we overcome that? This architecture might not work in that situation. Field test. Looking at field testing this out in some of our clients and seeing how it works in practice. Case studies around specific vendor offerings. I'd like to do some case studies looking at, okay, how does using a full Citrix element with vendor A, B, and C work versus a VMware Mobile Iron with vendor A, B, and C, and see how all those work, just kind of get an idea. The talk's vendor agnostic, but I'd like my own personal thing to know what vendors work better with this approach and what don't. And finally, case studies in specific verticals. Does it work well in finance? Does it work well in legal vertical, education vertical? So doing case studies from a vertical standpoint. And so that's our talk today. Hopefully, like I said, the big takeaway to take away from this today is this is to give you ideas. Not the only way to do it. I'm sure some of you have looked through this and go, okay, there's some cool stuff here. I can think of other ways to improve upon that. Perfect, go do it. I'm an academic by nature. Whole goal of academia with research is to put research out there and have others build upon that research. I'm a big believer in it. So anyone that has any questions or anything like that, we've reached our time today, but I will be around the con all weekend. Look for the guy in the Yoda Star Wars cap, and you can come say hi to me. Please, though, stay back for our next talk, which is my good friend Grape Ape here. We'll be teaching you about how to avoid getting 3 to 5 and have a nice long pen testing career. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it.